I used to believe my sister was just quiet. Not shy, eerily quiet. She never cried as a baby, never laughed as a child, and by the time we were teenagers, she'd stopped speaking entirely. Our parents said she was special, fragile, that her silence was something sacred. But last week, while cleaning out the attic after Mom's funeral, I found an old camcorder, and inside it, a tape. No label, just a single date. I pressed play, and within seconds, I understood. My sister hadn't been silent. She'd been silenced. The attic was a sauna of dust and grief. Rachel stood in the sharp light slanting through the window, sleeves rolled to her elbows, surrounded by boxes labeled Zmaz Decor, Dad's Books, Kitchen, Donate. She'd been sorting for hours, her throat dry, her hands raw from cardboard and old tape. Then she found it, a box marked Home VIDS. The sharpa had bled over the years, the letters fuzzy like they'd been crying. Inside, old VHS tapes rattled against each other, their plastic shells dulled with time. And there, nestled between a tape labeled Disneyland 98 and another marked Graduation, was a plain black tape with one thing scrawled on it, July 2nd, 2004. Rachel sat down cross-legged on the attic floor, the musty heat making her dizzy. That date clawed at something inside her, a half-memory, a shape just out of reach. She didn't have a VCR, not anymore. But she took the tape downstairs anyway, gripping it like a relic. Her hand shook as she searched online and found a store on Main Street that still converted old media. It would take a few hours. So she waited. When the file finally came through, she opened her laptop in the dark of her childhood bedroom. The air felt heavier here, the walls still hung with her old ballet ribbons, her bed too small for her adult frame. She clicked play. At first, just static. Then her father's voice, unmistakable, grainy but clear. Okay, it's recording. The screen flickered, and Rachel saw herself, age 9, sitting on the front steps in a pink sundress, legs swinging. Next to her sat Emily, her sister. For years younger. Pale. Still. Rachel watched as her younger self turned to the camera and smiled, waved, said something about popsicles. Emily stared ahead, silent, unmoving. Wave, their dad said behind the camera, his voice too cheerful. Wave for Mommy. But Emily didn't move. Then the footage jumped a harsh cut. Rachel blinked. The next scene showed the basement. Dim, cold. Emily was there again, but this time she wasn't sitting. She was standing in the corner, facing the wall. And someone off camera was whispering her name. Emily. Say it. Say what you did. Rachel paused the video. Her heart thundered against her ribs. She couldn't breathe. She rewound. Played it again. Emily. Say it. Say what you did. The voice didn't sound like her parents'. It was low, urgent, almost desperate. And Emily, tiny, trembling Emily, whispered something back. The sound was muffled, indecipherable. Rachel hit pause. She remembered none of this. Not the video, not the basement, not Emily speaking. And yet, that night in 2004, she did remember one thing. That was the summer Emily stopped talking forever. And the night the neighbor boy disappeared. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She kept the laptop open, the screen casting long shadows across the room. She stared at the frozen frame, her baby sister in the corner of the basement, barely lit, her thin arms limp at her sides like broken twigs. The footage ended without warning, cutting to black mid-sentence. She replayed the whisper again and again, slowing it down, raising the volume. But Emily's response was always too soft, buried under the hiss of old tape. And something else nagged at her: the date. July 2nd, 2004. That was the day 7-year-old Cody Myers went missing. He lived 2 houses down. Rachel remembered the flyers stapled to telephone poles, the neighborhood searches, the dogs combing the woods behind the cul-de-sac. They never found a body. Never even found a shoe. The town moved on, eventually. But Rachel never forgot how the air changed that summer, like something rotten had buried itself just beneath the surface of their perfect lawn. Now, 2 decades later, Rachel sat alone in her childhood home, clutching a memory she wasn't sure was hers. She needed answers. The next morning, she drove to the assisted living facility where her father now lived. He'd been slipping into dementia for the last few years, but sometimes he had flashes of lucidity, strange, sharp moments where his eyes looked too awake, too focused. He was watching game shows when she walked in. "Hey, Daddy," Rachel said, leaning down to kiss his cheek. He smiled, vaguely. "Pumpkin, you bring me pie?" "No," she said gently. "I brought a question." He looked at her then, really looked. Something in his expression shifted. Rachel pulled out her phone and queued up the video. She didn't show him the whole thing, just the part with Emily in the basement. The whisper, the trembling voice, the way she looked cornered, caged. Her father stared at the screen. Daddy, who filmed this? He was quiet for a long time. Then, barely above a whisper. She wasn't supposed to speak. Rachel's mouth went dry. Who wasn't? He looked at her with sudden intensity. Your mother said it would make her worse. Said Emily had episodes. Said the silence helped. Rachel felt a chill crawl up her spine. Did you believe that? I didn't ask questions. His voice cracked. But the boy, after he vanished. I saw Emily in the backyard. Just standing there. Hands all red. Rachel couldn't breathe. Why didn't you say anything? He turned to her, eyes glossy. Because your mother said if we kept it quiet, it would go away. Rachel stood, her knees threatening to buckle. She needed to talk to her mother. But her mother was dead. And Emily? Emily still lived in the house across town, alone, mute, and watched by a nurse who came twice a week. Rachel hadn't seen her sister in almost 6 years. But that night, she drove to the old brick house where Emily lived, parked across the street, and waited. Lights flickered inside. A shadow passed across the window. Then, just for a moment, Rachel thought she saw Emily staring back, straight at her, eyes wide, mouth moving, like she was trying to say something. The porch creaked beneath Rachel's feet, like a voice warning her to leave. The house hadn't changed. Same cracked paint on the shutters, same rusted wind chimes twitching in the breeze. It was the kind of place the neighborhood pretended not to see anymore. She rang the bell. Silence. She rang again, harder. The door cracked open an inch, the chain still latched. A pair of green eyes peeked out. Emily. Rachel's voice cracked. The door didn't move. I need to talk to you. Please. Nothing. Just the faint, wet sound of breathing behind the door. I saw the tape, Rachel said softly. From the attic. I saw you in the basement. I know something happened. The chain rattled. Then, slowly, the door closed again. Rachel stood there in the warm dusk, the wind dying in the trees. She turned to leave. Then the door opened. No chain this time. Emily stood in the doorway, barefoot, wearing an oversized hoodie with sleeves swallowed past her hands. Her hair was long, tangled. Her face, ghostly familiar. Pale as milk. She didn't speak. Just stepped aside. Rachel entered. The air smelled like cedar and bleach. The blinds were drawn. Inside, everything was too clean, unnervingly so. Surfaces shined. Not a speck of dust. No photos. No clutter. The place felt sterile. Surgical. Emily led her to the living room and sat on the couch. Rachel took the chair across from her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Rachel's eyes scanned the room. There were locks on every door, including the inside of the basement door, bolted from this side. Why did Mom keep that tape? Rachel asked. Why was it hidden? Emily looked down, then slowly reached for a small whiteboard and marker on the coffee table. She scribbled. She watched it. Over and over. Said it reminded her to be careful. Rachel's stomach twisted. Careful of what? Emily's eyes darted toward the hallway. Then she scribbled again. Me. The room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were breathing in. I don't understand, Rachel said quietly. What happened that summer, Emily? What happened to Cody Myers? Emily didn't move. Then she picked up the marker again, hand shaking slightly. She wrote. He screamed. Rachel's voice dropped. Who screamed? Emily stared at her. Scribbled one word. Me. Rachel blinked. You screamed? Emily nodded. Rachel's heart thudded. Why? What did he do? Emily didn't write. She stood, walked to the hallway, and opened the door to the basement. Rachel followed, pulse hammering now, dread blooming with each step down the narrow staircase. The basement was colder than she remembered. Dim, the only light came from a bare bulb swaying gently from the ceiling. Emily pointed to the far wall. There, half concealed by a stack of storage bins, was a patch of wall that didn't match the rest. The paint was newer, the plaster uneven. Rachel stepped closer, hand outstretched, and knocked. Hello. She turned to Emily, who stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, eyes wide, lips trembling. What's behind this? Rachel whispered. Emily didn't answer, but she mouthed a single word. A name. Cody. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. The name hung between them like poison. Emily stood stiff in the shadows, her eyes filling with something between terror and guilt. Rachel turned back to the wall, her fingers trembling as she traced the uneven surface. "Did Mom do this?" she asked, barely able to speak. Emily didn't respond. Rachel backed away from the wall like it might lunge at her. Her mind spun. This couldn't be happening. Cody had vanished without a trace. The police had searched the woods, drained the creek behind his house. And all this time, this house. This wall. Rachel grabbed her phone. "I need to call someone." "The police?" Emily shook her head violently, stepping forward, grabbing Rachel's wrist with a grip that startled her. She shook her head again, mouthing, "Don't." "Why not?" Rachel hissed, yanking her arm free. "He deserves to be found. His family, God. Emily, they've been waiting 20 years for answers." Emily wrote furiously on the whiteboard she'd brought down with her. "You don't know what she did. You don't know what he did." Rachel read it. "He was 7. What could he have done?" Emily hesitated, then wrote, "He followed me. In the woods. He wouldn't stop. He said he'd tell. About the cabin." Rachel's blood ran cold. "What cabin?" Emily blinked, then slowly led her back upstairs, out the back door, and across the backyard, to the tree line that bordered the woods. Rachel hadn't stepped back here in years. The woods were denser than she remembered, overgrown and whispering. They walked in silence, branches catching in their clothes. After 10 minutes, Emily stopped. There it was, barely visible through the undergrowth, a rotting shed, swallowed by ivy. Rachel pushed open the door. The hinges screamed. Inside, the air was thick and damp, the smell of mold and decay everywhere. And in the center of the floor was a trapdoor. Emily didn't move. Rachel knelt, heart racing, and lifted it. A wooden ladder led down into a crawl space. The air shifted. Rachel felt it. Something old. Something wrong. She descended slowly, her phone flashlight cutting through the dark. At the bottom, she found a tiny room, dirt floor, rotting beams overhead, and in one corner, a pile of cloth. Old blankets. And toys. Toys from another time. Rachel picked one up. A plastic action figure, the kind they stopped making years ago. Its paint was chipped. It looked gnawed. Emily dropped down beside her, silent as a ghost. She pointed at the corner. Rachel followed her gaze. Etched into the wall were dozens of scratch marks. Small. Jagged. Desperate. Next to them, a name carved over and over again. Cody. 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 Rachel turned, horror flooding her lungs. "Emily, what is this place?" Emily wrote one final word on the board. Punishment. Rachel couldn't move. The silence in that crawl space felt thicker than air. Like if she breathed wrong, the weight of everything buried here would crush her. She stared at the wall, the frantic carvings, the gouges in the wood. They weren't just a child's graffiti. They were marks of someone trying to stay alive. "Emily," Rachel whispered, "who did this to him?" Her sister stood frozen, her whiteboard hanging at her side like an anchor. Her eyes brimmed with something sharp and unspoken. Rachel stepped closer. "Was it you?" Emily blinked once. Then slowly, heartbreakingly, she shook her head. Rachel's voice broke. "Then who?" Emily didn't write. Instead, she turned and climbed back up the ladder. Rachel followed, the light from her phone casting long shadows on the rotting walls. They stepped out into the woods, the sky now bruised with twilight. "She made rules," Emily finally whispered, so quietly Rachel almost missed it. Rachel froze. It was the first time she'd heard Emily speak in nearly 20 years. "What?" she breathed. Emily stared straight ahead, her voice hoarse, mechanical. "She had rules. For me. For you. For everyone. And if we broke them?" Her voice trailed off. Rachel's mind reeled. Mom. It had always been Mom's voice, soothing, controlling, always just a bit too calm when things fell apart. Mom who insisted Emily was sensitive, special, not like other kids. Mom who pulled them out of school the day after Cody disappeared. Mom who never let them talk about it. Who always said, what's in the past is better left buried. Rachel's knees buckled. She heard him, Rachel said, stunned. Mom locked him in that place. Emily nodded. But why? Emily's mouth trembled. Because he saw. He followed me after school. I went there sometimes, to get away. She didn't like that. Said it was my shame space. Said I couldn't bring anyone there. Rachel's skin crawled. So when Cody found it, she said he'd tell. That he'd ruin everything. Emily's voice cracked. So she punished him. Like she punished me when I spoke. Rachel felt like the trees were tilting around her. The world unraveling. How long was he down there? Emily shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks now. I don't know, she whispered. She made me stop going. Said it was over. Said if I ever talked about it, she'd make me forget like she made you forget. Rachel blinked. What? She said kids forget pain. She said you were too small to remember. But you were there. Rachel staggered backward. No, I wasn't. I would have remembered. You held the camera. The words were a blade. Rachel stared at her sister. No, she whispered. That's not possible. She made you, Emily said. She told you it was a game. Said you were helping. Said you were strong enough. Brave enough. Like her. Rachel felt her stomach lurch. The attic tape. The whispering voice. It wasn't their father behind the camera. It was her. She had filmed it. Rachel turned away and vomited into the leaves. Rachel sat on the cold ground, hands pressed into the damp earth, trying to ground herself, to prove she was real, that this was real. But the world spun sideways. Her childhood, her family, her own identity, it all felt like a painted set now, propped up by lies. She remembered fragments. A laugh. A flashlight. Her mother whispering, just point it there. Baby. Good girl. But not Cody. Not the fear. Not the trapdoor. Why don't I remember? She asked. Emily sank beside her, shoulders hunched. Because she did it to you too. Rachel turned. Did what? Emily wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie. She had these routines. After something bad, she called them washes. She'd make you lie still. Tell you a new story. A better one. Over and over until you believed it. Rachel stared. She'd say, you went to the park today. You got ice cream. Nothing scary happened. Nothing dark. You're clean now. She'd say it like a lullaby. For hours. Days. Rachel's mind burned. It explained everything, the blank years, the strange aversion she couldn't name, the reason why a neighbor boy vanished and no one ever came knocking on their door. She brainwashed us, Rachel said, her voice cracking. Emily nodded. She called it protection. Rachel looked down at her hands, adult hands, competent hands, hands that had held a camera while a child was tormented. How could she? She thought she was fixing us, Emily whispered. She thought if we never spoke the truth, it would go away, that the evil wouldn't stick. Rachel suddenly needed to see it again. The tape. They drove back to the house. The attic was a furnace again, filled with the dust of things they were never meant to find. Rachel set up her laptop, inserted the converted file, and pressed play. She watched herself, 9 years old, giggling, obedient. Then the camera moved. It was unsteady, childlike, focused on Emily in the corner of the basement. A voice, hers, echoed from behind the lens. High-pitched. Nervous. Say what you did, Emily. Rachel froze. The whisper wasn't her mother's. It was hers. Emily flinched on screen, then whispered something inaudible. The camera zoomed closer, like a little girl trying to be helpful, like someone following orders. Rachel couldn't look away. Another voice entered the frame, not in front of the camera, but just behind her, guiding her. That's it, Rachel. You're doing great. You're helping her heal. Her mother's voice. Rachel pressed pause. Emily sat beside her on the attic floor, head bowed. I told once, Emily whispered, to the school nurse. I said I was scared. That mom locked me in the basement sometimes. She called Child Protective Services. Rachel looked at her. What happened? Emily met her eyes. Mom said I lied. She said if they took me away, it would be my fault you got hurt. So I took it back. Rachel swallowed, her heart a raw wound. Is that when you stopped talking? Emily nodded. I thought if I stayed quiet, she wouldn't need to fix me anymore. Rachel's hands balled into fists. She stole our childhood. Emily looked at her. She stole more than that. Rachel didn't speak on the drive to the police station. Emily sat beside her, clutching the whiteboard like a shield. Her silence wasn't fear anymore. It was preparation. Rachel felt it, too. The strange calm that comes when the worst thing you can imagine has already happened. When there's nothing left to lose. Inside, Rachel gave her name. Her story. The tape. They didn't believe her at first. But once the video was reviewed, everything changed. It took 3 days for the warrant. On the 4th, detectives unearthed the wall in the basement. Behind it, in a space barely big enough for a child to sit, they found fabric fibers, traces of hair. No body, but enough to reopen the Cody Myers case. A week later, the crawl space beneath the cabin was excavated. They found something else there. A second cache of items, not from Cody, but from Emily. A diary. Drawings. A locket with Rachel's photo. All sealed in a tin box, buried deep in the dirt like a time capsule no one was ever meant to find. The diary entries were disjointed. Repetitive. but they painted a pattern. She makes me go quiet. She says it helps the dark stay away. Rachel said I shouldn't cry. Rachel said I'm brave like her. The boy found the secret place. She said he can't tell. And finally, I saw Rachel push the door shut. I told Mommy. She said we'd fix it together. Rachel stared at the page, her world crumbling all over again. She remembered her mother's hand on her shoulder. The praise. The way she said, "You're helping, baby. You're protecting your sister. She's fragile. She needs us to be strong." She remembered the trapdoor. The scream. The way she'd closed it. Her hand on the latch. Not understanding. Not questioning. Believing it was a game. Rachel fell to her knees. The DA declined to prosecute. Too much time had passed. Too little physical evidence. And most of the people involved were dead, including their mother, who died peacefully in her sleep, never once confessing what she'd done. But the town changed. The Myers family held a vigil. Emily attended in silence, a single white rose trembling in her hand. Rachel stood beside her, hollowed out and quiet. At the reception, Mrs. Myers touched Rachel's arm. Her voice soft, cracked. "You were so little back then," she said. "We never blamed you. We never knew what happened." Rachel nodded, unable to speak. Because now she knew everything. She had held the camera. She had locked the door. She had forgotten it all, because forgetting was easier than knowing she was part of it. But Emily had remembered, and paid for both of them. In the end, they sold the house, burned the old tapes, left the town where the shadows were too long and the silence too thick. They moved north to a small town where no one knew them. Emily began therapy. Rachel, too. Sometimes they talk. Sometimes they don't. But in the quiet, there's no more pretending. Just two sisters rebuilding what was stolen, word by painful word. And in the still of night, when Rachel can't sleep, she walks to the mirror, looks at her face, and whispers the truth out loud. Just to remember it's real. I was part of it. But I'm not her. Not anymore.